I was told that my last 100-point review video was too boring. So this time, I'm trying to find just the right amount of boring. First off, I just want to say a big thank you to all of my subscribers and viewers here on the channel. Back at the end of February, I finally hit the 1,000 subscriber threshold, which meant I could start monetizing my videos. And earlier this month, I hit 2,000. That's amazing. I know the monetization thing makes it sound like I'm Scrooge McDuck over here, but I'm definitely not getting rich. I pre-ordered the bass I'm about to review on May 28th. My hope was to make just enough money in YouTube ad revenue to pay for the bass by the time it arrived, which ended up being on November 30th. I'm pleased to say it happened. So, like I said, I'm definitely not getting rich on YouTube, but I'm hopeful the community here on the channel can continue to grow because your comments make things more interesting, even if the videos themselves are too boring. And your engagement also means I can earn enough from these videos to make the channel self-sustaining. That's my real goal, just to make enough money from these videos to fund buying new music gear to review. But I don't have a ton of space around here, so that does mean I'm also going to be selling some of this gear in the very near future. Watch for more details coming soon. That means you should be sure to click like and subscribe, ring the bell, and comment below. Yes, your engagement juices the algorithm, and I'm not going to pretend I don't want that. But look, I'm just this weirdly obsessive music gear nerd, sitting here nerding out for my fellow nerds. That's what it's really all about, and your support makes that happen. Thank you. Today I'm reviewing the Sterling by Music Man Joe Dart 1 electric bass. But as usual, I don't feel like I can just jump right in. I have to talk a little bit first about the significance of the 7-word name for this instrument. Let's break it down. Background, Part 1, Sterling by Music Man. In 1965, Leo Fender sold his namesake guitar company to CBS. After his non-compete clause expired in the early 1970s, he moved on to his next venture, the company that would eventually become Music Man. There, he continued to refine his design concepts for electric guitars and basses, famously producing the Stingray bass, which burst onto the scene in the late 1970s, with its distinctive giant humbucker pickup, oval pickguard, 3+1 headstock, and active EQ. It was immediately embraced by bassists like John Deacon of Queen, Bernard Edwards of Chic, and Tony Levin of King Crimson and Peter Gabriel, and has become one of the most highly regarded electric bass designs ever since. Leo Fender's role within Music Man in the late 1970s got complicated, and by the end of the decade he left to form yet another venture, G&L, where again he continued to refine his design concepts until his death in 1991. Sadly, G&L itself died earlier this year, and its intellectual property assets were acquired by the Modern Fender Company. After Leo Fender's departure, Music Man careened towards bankruptcy and was acquired by Ernie Ball in 1984. Ernie Ball Music Man lives on today and seems to be thriving, or is at least on more solid ground than G&L was. Like many other American guitar companies in the 21st century, in the wake of increasing manufacturing costs, Ernie Ball Music Man created a subsidiary brand to manufacture less expensive versions of their instruments in Asia, called Sterling by Music Man. It's a bit of an odd name, since Sterling is also the name of a model of electric bass Music Man produces. So there's the Music Man Sterling bass, a model produced in the US. Then there is Sterling by Music Man, a subsidiary brand that produces a wide range of guitars and basses in Asia, and that does include the Sterling. Yes, Virginia, there is a Sterling by Music Man Sterling bass. This point will become significant in a moment. Background, Part 2. Who is Joe Dart? No, that's not the tagline of a ponderous mid-20th century novel beloved by insufferable libertarians. Joe Dart is a funk bassist, best known for his work with Vulfpeck and more recently as part of the offshoot band The Fearless Flyers. There he's known for playing large guitar, along with Mark Lettieri on medium guitar, Corey Wong on small guitar, and Nate Smith on drums. Joe Dart himself somehow isn't quite big enough yet to have his own Wikipedia page, at least not in English. But he does in the French version, so that's where I got some of the following details. He was born in Michigan in 1991, and he started playing bass when he was just 8 years old, inspired by Flea. In college, he met the other musicians with whom he would form Vulfpeck at the age of 20. According to the article, his other big influences are Bernard Edwards of Chic and the ubiquitous session player Pino Palladino, which, sure, how could they not be? But listen to him play, and it's also obvious that he was massively influenced by the legendary Tower of Power bassist Rocco Prestia. In a recent Scott's Bass Lessons video, he also cited James Jamerson and Chuck Rainey as influences. Background, Part 3. 1. A few years ago, Joe Dart worked with Ernie Ball Music Man to produce a bare-bones but premium quality signature electric bass, built on the basic design of the Music Man Sterling bass. It has the signature chunky Music Man humbucker pickup, placed near the signature Music Man oval-shaped high-mass bridge, and the signature Music Man 3+1 headstock design. So, wait, is it a Joe Dart signature or a Music Man signature? Well, the unique element Joe Dart brings is an almost comically stripped-down design. Natural finish on a Nash body, no pickguard, flame maple fretboard, and passive electronics consisting of only a single volume control, with a comically oversized white knob. This is the Joe Dart signature bass, a $2,700 minimalist masterpiece. But they didn't stop there. Music Man and Joe Dart worked together to create a more affordable Sterling by Music Man option. For the past few years, a limited run of these basses, available by pre-order only, has been produced in Indonesia, using less expensive woods, but the same basic design concept, and selling for only $400. This year's run jumped to $500, but they did also throw in a gig bag. Wait though, where does the one come from? There are now actually 3 signature Joe Dart basses. The one, based on the Sterling, with its body shape, single humbucker, and compact headstock. The 2, which looks a bit more like a Fender jazz bass, with 2 single-coil pickups and thus 2 oversized volume knobs. And the 3, reminiscent of a short-scale version of a Fender Precision bass, with a single split-coil pickup in the middle position. For me, the choice was clear, though. I had to get the 1. That's the one Joe Dart plays on stage. And this year, he's actually been playing, quite visibly, the Sterling by Music Man version of this instrument. What better marketing could there be? I guess it worked on me. Oh yeah, remember how I said there's a Sterling by Music Man Sterling bass? Well, since this one uses the Sterling body and headstock design, it effectively is one of those Sterling Sterlings. Okay, I think that's just the right amount of boring. Let's get into the 100-point review. Design. Describe this bass and it sounds like a joke, but it's not. The only way they could have designed a simpler electric bass would be to take away strings. But if you go in understanding that the simplicity is the point, it's genius. They nailed it. I said in my unboxing video that I thought the neck, including the fretboard, felt unfinished. Well, I happened to be emailing with Sterling customer support about FedEx mangling the box, so I asked. They assured me that the body and neck do have a matte poly finish and should not be oiled. Okay, good to know. It still feels kind of unfinished to me. The body is soft maple with only a light amount of grain. I have to admit that it took until I had had the bass in my possession for a week before I actually looked closely at the body under bright light to see how many pieces it is. 3. It's 3 pieces. That's not surprising. I certainly didn't expect a single piece. 2 might have been nice, with a carefully blended seam down the middle, hidden under the strings. Of course, now that I've noticed, I can't unnotice. But what are you going to do? It's a $500 instrument. This is exactly the kind of compromise that has to be made. Even the American-made ones have multi-piece bodies. If that's the kind of thing that's a deal breaker for you, there's a black matte finish option. In fact, now I finally get why some people would choose black. But for me, natural was still the way to go. My personal ambivalence about the matte finish and the barely visible body seams aside, the actual production of the instrument is flawless as far as I can tell. Still, I don't think I can possibly give this design a 10, so I'm going to give it a 9. Neck. The neck feels and plays great. The fretwork is as good as any I've seen. I will say that I'm glad I took the time to record my first impressions right when I took it out of the box, because after a week in the cold, dry climate of Minnesota in December, I'm noticing just the slightest hint of fret sprout. It definitely was not that way when I took it out of the box. I can't fault the instrument for my choice to live on planet Hoth. Details like a rolled fretboard are rare at this price. Everything is perfectly executed, but the way the fretboard feels unfinished makes it less than perfect for me. I'm just not used to the idea of a maple fretboard without a glossy finish. but once I started playing it, I didn't really notice. I'm going to give the neck another 9. As long as I'm talking about the neck, maybe I should also talk about neck dive. That, like tone wood and overall weight, is honestly something I rarely pay much attention to, even though I know it's a hot topic for a lot of gear reviewers. The first time I played this bass at a rehearsal, I noticed that it did have fairly substantial neck dive, but then I thought about the strap I was using. It was a couch seatbelt strap. Yeah, that super slippy, woven nylon they make seatbelts out of. It's a really nice material for guitar straps, but like I said, it's slippy. I own a bunch of couch straps. I like their distinctive style and their commitment to upcycling found remnants like, 1978 Ford Thunderbird seat upholstery. I have this other couch strap made from that upholstery sewn onto a strip of textured faux leather vinyl. Not so slippy. I tried the bass with that strap, and even though I preferred the look of the seatbelt strap with this particular bass, the upholstery and pleather strap has 0 neck dive. What that says to me is that neck dive is probably at least as much a factor of the material of the strap you're using as it is about the weight distribution of the instrument itself. Let's move on. Nut. This nut is perfect. Very clean, cut precisely, none of the crap I've repeatedly complained about from Fender. The Sterling website doesn't say what it's made of, but I'm going to venture a guess that it's a synthetic bone material like micarta, possibly natural bone. It's definitely not plastic. But if you know the specifics, please speak up down in the comments. I have absolutely no complaints about this nut, but now that I've experienced the Sadowski Justa nut, nothing else can earn a 10, so I'll give it a 9. Bridge. It's the classic Music Man oval bridge design. Excellent build quality. It achieves a higher mass and increased sustain not by being thicker, but by having a much larger surface area to make contact with the body. Honestly, I've always found these bridges a little goofy looking, especially the wing that extends out the back. What's that for? Just to hide the ball ends of the strings? Is it like a bumper to protect the end of the instrument? G&L Instruments continued the sort of oversized, weirdly shaped bridge concept, but I think they improved on what the Music Man has. Still, even if these various designs are no longer covered by patents, they're kind of the signature look of these brands, so they'll stick with them even if something new is technically better. Looks aside, this bridge does its job flawlessly. It's a Leo Fender design, so of course it's also highly functional. The saddles are easy to adjust for both height and intonation, and the addition of grooves to keep the saddles in line is a nice touch. My only complaint that isn't purely aesthetic is that it would be nice to have a stringing option that didn't require feeding the entire string through a hole in the bridge, but that's just not how Music Man does it, and there's nothing wrong with the way it is. Of course, this bass actually came with the exact set of strings I would have put on anyway, so I didn't need to change them. The bridge also gets a 9. Hardware. This is my catch-all category for parts I don't talk about elsewhere. Tuners, knobs, switches, and strap buttons. The tuners are very reliable and turn smoothly. Very good for an instrument in this price range. A 9. The oversized volume knob looks cool, or at least funny, but feels a bit cheap. Maybe an 8. But the strap buttons are some of the nicest I've ever seen. A definite 10. Overall, the hardware gets a 9. Cavities. I opened up the cavity in my unboxing video, but we really need to take another look at it here. It's a marvel to behold. Shielding foil on the cover, shielding paint thoroughly coating the cavity, and it might not even need it because it's just a single humbucker. The only reasons I'm giving the cavities a 9 instead of a perfect 10 are that the wires could be slightly tidier and there was a little bit of sawdust left in the corner. Really nitpicky stuff. Electronics. The single volume control does exactly what it's supposed to do. It turns smoothly and provides a good gradation of volume with no crackle. That's it. The electronics are super basic, so it can't get a 10, but that cable running from the pickup to the pot is the thickest one I've ever seen in a bass. Presumably, it's well insulated to keep the sound clean. For me, the electronics get another 9. Pickup. Just one pickup, but it's a classic Music Man style humbucker. It's ceramic and very high output. But it seems well balanced, and even though there's no tone knob, it's not really needed because the sound is perfectly dialed in. It's not entirely surprising, but I do notice the output is much lower when your right hand is over the neck versus right at the pickup. Of course, that's the case with any bass, but it's especially true with this one. So if you plan to vary where you place your right hand, keep in mind that you might need to adjust the volume accordingly. Overall, though, this is a great sounding pickup and consistent with what I've come to expect on this instrument. A 9. Action. This bass arrived with an absolutely pro setup, the best out-of-the-box setup I can remember on any instrument I've received. Intonation seemed to be dialed in perfectly and there was no fret buzz. but the action was just a tad higher than I would like. Yes, I could have adjusted it, but when something arrives this close to perfect, I'm inclined to leave it alone as long as possible. I don't know if the setup was done at the factory in Indonesia or by techs at the Music Man shop in Los Angeles. Either way, they cared enough to put that extra attention to detail into delivering an optimal experience. I think shipping an instrument with a good setup is even more important for beginner and intermediate instruments than it is for pro gear. Sure, the pro prices probably make taking the time to do a setup worth it from a financial perspective, but from a musical perspective, experienced players are either going to know how to do the setup themselves or they're going to have a luthier they already work with to do it. Younger or novice players are unlikely to even know setup is a thing, so if the instrument arrives unplayable out of the box, what are they going to do about it? I guess what I'm really trying to say is that instrument manufacturers should do a proper setup on every instrument, regardless of price. I get why it's an obvious corner to cut on cheap gear. Sterling by Music Man did not cut that corner here. But, hold on, that was all my initial reaction to the out-of-the-box experience. 4 days later, I went to record some demo tracks for this video, and I discovered the intonation was way off, and the action seemed higher too. Well, here's the thing. The space was shipped to me from Los Angeles. I'm in Minneapolis, and it's December. Not just December, but it's been unusually cold and snowy this week, even by our standards. So what happened? The bass continued to acclimate over the course of the week. Now it needed some adjustments. So I interrupted my little psychedelic recording session with swirling colored lights and put the bass back on the bench. Let's sort this out. First off, now that it's more familiar with its new home, this bass needs a truss rod adjustment. There's too much relief. Time to try out the pin with the truss rod adjustment wheel at the heel of the neck. This is vastly superior to a typical hex tool adjustment and much less likely to mar the finish. I did notice that the metal the pin's made out of is a bit weak for this task. It bent a bit as I tried to turn the wheel, but after a few small turns, I got the curvature of the neck right where I wanted it. With that change, the intonation mostly settled back in. Only the E string needed a bit of additional tweaking. Then I decided maybe I could try lowering the action just a bit more at the saddles. One turn on each string and everything still sounded good. There was a tiny bit of fret buzz now on the G string, so I raised that saddle back up half a turn. Now it feels perfect. And still no fret buzz. I'm actually glad this happened because it forced me to test the adjustment capabilities of the bass, and once again it really impressed me. It was super easy to dial in a great setup. Based on the initial out-of-the-box setup, before winter messed things up, I'd give the action a 9. Now, after my adjustments, it's maybe a 9.5, but I only do whole numbers here, so let's stick with 9. Sound. Yeah, it sounds great, but there's only so much you can do with it. That's the point, but it can't earn a 10 all by itself, and honestly, I'm not a good enough player to give it that extra bump, so I'm going to give it a 9. Let's tally it up. Design, neck, nut, bridge, hardware, cavities, electronics, pickups, action, and sound. 9s across the board. Total, 90. Yes, that's right, 9s across the board. This bass is what it is, and it is that flawlessly. The Winter Olympics are coming up in a couple of months, so I'm thinking about those sports that involve subjective scoring by judges, like figure skating. Skaters' routines have a degree of difficulty built into them, which puts an upper ceiling on the score they can achieve. You might have totally nailed it, but a double axel just isn't as difficult as a triple. When it comes to giving it a score, the Joe Dart bass is kind of like a skating routine with a low degree of difficulty. Honestly, I think Sterling by Music Man just about nailed everything they were going for here. But I can't give this bass 100 points because it's deliberately designed in a way that could never be considered a perfect instrument, unless you fully embrace Joe Dart's vision of a bass boiled down to its bare essentials. Oh, but we're not done because there's also extra credit. I offer a total of up to 10 extra credit points in 3 categories. 2 points if the bass ships with flat wound strings, 2 to 5 points for an included gig bag, depending on its quality, and 1 to 3 je ne sais quoi points for whatever unexpected surprises delight me about an instrument. Now that this bass is here, I will admit something. I created this scoring system for my review of the Sadowski Metro Express hybrid 5-string bass back in May. I was making that video right as I was mulling over whether or not to pre-order the Joe Dart. I knew that it came with flats and a gig bag, so I specifically had this bass in mind when I came up with the extra credit idea. I'm not saying I put my thumb on the scale for this bass. I almost exclusively play flats, and I think more basses should ship with them. I also started my musical journey in an era in the 80s and 90s when every musical instrument, of course, came with a case of some kind, generally a hard shell. How can you sell an instrument without a case? The idea that cases would become an expensive add-on option to an instrument was absolutely incomprehensible. But as manufacturing costs went up, companies switched from hard shells to cheaper gig bags. Eventually, ditching any kind of case altogether was a logical step. Now we're at a point where almost no instruments under $1,000 ship with any kind of case, and hard shells are reserved for only the most premium gear. That bums me out. Anyway, the point is, I stand by these as my extra credit criteria, even though they were chosen with this specific bass in mind. A decent gig bag costs at least $100, and a set of Ernie Ball flats runs about $45. That's retail, but I'm sure these are adding at least $35 total to the cost of production. It's nice that they're included, so let's have a look. Flats. Not just flats, but the exact set of Ernie Ball 2805s that I would have chosen. 2 points, no question. Gig bag. This gig bag is not great. I mean, it's got thick, dense padding, and it's super plush on the inside.
That's good.
But there's no extra reinforcement at the ends. I think that might be how FedEx managed to damage the headstock in shipment.
That's bad.
Can I go now?
On top of that, it only has one meager, completely unprotected zipper pocket on the outside. It's barely big enough for a cable, and it really seems like it was just tacked on as an afterthought. I was going to give the gig bag my bare minimum 2 points, but then I realized it did keep the bass in one piece, despite what FedEx tried to do to it, and it was the only cushioning inside the shipping box. So, well, okay, fine, 3 points. Je ne sais quoi. For the first time ever, I'm going to give this bass all 3 je ne sais quoi points. 1 point for the sheer audacity of designing and selling a bass like this, and 1 point for exceptional value. To get a bass built this well for $500 in 2025 is virtually unheard of. But then to get it with a relatively decent gig bag and a $45 set of flats pre-installed, that's definitely unheard of. But wait, that's only 2. Where's the 3rd point? That's for Sterling by Music Man customer support. I emailed them immediately after FedEx dropped the box, literally, at my door, with photos of the damage. Of course, I waited a day to let the bass acclimate before opening the box, and in the meantime, they had already replied, asking me to please contact them again if I found there was any damage to the instrument itself. So I did. I told them about the ding. It's not a big deal. I just thought they should know. They replied later the same day asking for photos for their files and offering me a free Sterling by Music Man t-shirt and another set of Ernie Ball 2805 flats. So I got 2 sets of Ernie Ball flats with this bass and a new t-shirt. If that's not je ne sais quoi, I don't know what is. Of course, now that they've plied me with free merch, they're free to ignore the crux of my complaint, which is that I think they should stop doing business with FedEx. But I can't fault the bass for that, or even the company, really. I understand the economics. They don't really have a choice, other than to not do business at all. Final score, 98. Thoughts on artist signature instruments? I got a very interesting question in a comment on my earlier unboxing video for this bass. If it was an artist series, would you buy it? I wrote a lengthy reply that went something like this. I usually refuse to consider artist signature instruments, even if I really like the characteristics of the instrument and the artist. The whole idea of an artist signature instrument seems more like overpriced wall art for a midlife crisis man cave to me than a serious tool for an active musician. The only other artist signature instrument I've ever owned is the Squier J. Mascis Jazzmaster. I bought that instrument because I was impressed with its features and price, and it's now my main electric guitar. I'm not even a Dinosaur Jr. fan. As for this Joe Dart, well, I am a Joe Dart fan, but I wouldn't buy his instrument if I didn't like it on its own merits. So I guess the real question is, would I like this instrument enough, entirely on its own merits, to have even noticed it without his name attached? Possibly, but it really wouldn't exist on its own, would it? A design this audaciously basic probably would never get made if an artist wasn't associated with it to convince the manufacturer it was a viable product. And still, I wouldn't consider it if it weren't also so inexpensive and yet so highly regarded as being of quality far beyond what you'd expect at this price point. Put it this way, I would never even consider the Ernie Ball Music Man version that sells for $2,700, even though I deeply respect the brand and the artist. I just can't justify that kind of expense for a single musical instrument. To get this fine-tuned minimalist design and impeccable build quality for only $500, and they throw in Ernie Ball flats in a gig bag, that is a unique deal worth noticing, even if I only did, at first anyway, because of that goofy head-bobbing dude in the sunglasses. I think an instrument like this only ever gets made in the first place with a name like Joe Dart attached to it. So what's the bottom line? Is this bass worth the money? Absolutely. It's worth considerably more than the money, I would say. Based on my price to score matrix, with a score of 98, it's worth over $2,000. But even if you throw out the extra credit, I would say this bass was a great deal at $900. Or maybe another more concrete comparison. As I was working on the script for this video, I saw Low End Lobster had reviewed the new Fender American Professional Classic Mustang bass in the exact faded Fiesta Red color I had been coveting in my video about the introduction of the series back in October. Lobster pointed out a number of egregious QC issues with the Fender, which honestly is not that surprising coming out of Corona these days. Disappointing, but not surprising. I haven't had a chance to see one in person, but I took a look at the close-up photos of one Sweetwater had in stock at the time, and I'm pretty sure I saw the same issues Lobster pointed out about the misaligned bridge and long scale strings, on a bass that sells for $1,600. I have absolutely no doubt that my Joe Dart bass went through far more rigorous quality control, plus a proper setup, than Fender is giving their new instruments that are more than 3 times the price. Yes, I would say that the Joe Dart is absolutely, objectively, worth the money. But is it worth owning? That's a much more subjective question. It depends on your budget and your needs in an instrument. It also depends on what you already own. I own 9 basses right now. Okay, I think that's just straight up ridiculous. I'm planning to cull the herd shortly. Stay tuned for another video about that. A couple of those 9 basses are honestly kind of trash. They were cheap, I just bought them as curiosities, and they live up to that label. The others I own, for the most part, fill a specific niche for me, although honestly, some of them overlap. A few are obvious keepers. There's my beloved Franken bass, the Precision Jaguar Hybrid I built myself earlier this year from carefully selected parts. That's my go-to for all occasions. The Ibanez AGB 200 is my current favorite and is probably the most useful to me for my needs at the moment. The Squier Classic Vibe Active 70s Jazz Bass 5 is my only 5-string, and it's a damn fine instrument, so that one's not going anywhere. Honestly, if the Joe Dart has a permanent place in my collection, it might nudge out the Bass of Theseus, my Fender Squier Hybrid Jazz Bass. I'm not sure I really need both a 4 and a 5-string jazz bass. The Bass of Theseus exists mainly to be my backup bass for things like outdoor gigs with a chance of rain. I would absolutely be confident in bringing the Joe Dart along as a backup bass to any gig. It's rock solid, it feels great to play, it sounds great, and I have no doubts about its reliability. It's inexpensive enough that you don't need to worry too much about something happening to it, even if you can't just go out and buy a replacement. So yeah, if you need a dependable backup instrument, I think it's an absolutely fantastic choice. I also think it's a fantastic choice for an intermediate player who's looking for a step up, especially if they're a fingerstyle funk player. I highly doubt that there's a better made electric bass out there in the $500 price range, or even well above that. This is only the second Sterling by Music Man instrument I've ever touched. The other was a sub-series Ray 34 I messed around with for a few minutes that happened to be sitting on a stand in a rehearsal room. In other words, I don't have a ton of experience with the brand. I did own a couple of American-made Ernie Ball Music Man basses like 20 years ago. Those instruments were absolute perfection, other than being boat anchors. But in my very limited experience, it does seem like Ernie Ball is holding the Indonesian manufacturing of these mid-range Sterling instruments to the same high standard. The point is, I guess, take my experience with a grain of salt, and maybe check out a few other YouTubers' videos about this instrument as well. But if my experience is typical, then I'd say, if you even think you might want one of these, get your pre-order in on the 2026 crop as soon as you can. Okay, that's all for this video. I'm off to the funk farm. Thanks for watching.